Parshas Vayakhel begins with the following verse. This is chapter 35, verse 1. Lamed Hey Aleph. Vayakhel Moshe es kol hadas bnei Yisrael, Vayomer Alehem. And Moshe assembled all the congregation of the children of Israel, and he said to them, Ele hadvarim asher tzivah Hashem la'asos osam. These are the things that Hashem has commanded that you do. We have a number of questions. The first is, why does it say Vayakhel Moshe, that Moshe gathered all the people together? It could simply have said, as the Torah says countless times, right? Daber Moshe el bnei Yisrael, or el kol bnei Yisrael. What's this Vayakhel? Vayakhel means he assembled them together. How is that different from any other time that Moshe spoke to the children of Israel? Also, what's this business about Ele hadvarim? These are the things asher tzivah Hashem la'asos osam. These are the things that God commanded to do. Just say what God commanded to do. Why do you say these are the things that God commanded to do? And finally, and this is the question of the Malbim, the following verses are the subject, are the words that Moshe spoke about the command. What are they? Sheshes yomim te'asem lacho v'yom hashvi'i yihiyeh lachem kodesh Shabbason Hashem. 6 days work shall be done, and on the seventh day shall be a holy day for you, a day of solemn rest to Hashem. Kol ha'oseh bo melacha yumas. Whoever does work on it, whoever does one of the prohibited activities, will die, shall be put to death. And then the next verse, Lo savaru eish b'chol mashosechem b'yom Shabbos. Don't kindle fire wherever you live on Shabbos. Then it goes on to something else with a new introduction. Vayomer Moshe el kol hadas bnei Yisrael lemor. And then it goes on to talk about raising funds, or more precisely materials, for the building of the Mishkan. So it's on to a different subject. So the Malbim says, if the whole thing that you're introducing is Shabbos, you're not saying these are the things that you should do. What Moshe is really saying is these are the things that you shouldn't do. You shouldn't do malacha. That's what the verse says. You shouldn't light a fire, which is a specific type of malacha. Malacha being prohibited, the creative activity that is prohibited on Shabbos. So why does it say, these are the things that Hashem commanded to do? It should be not to do them. So we need to examine this a bit more closely. First of all, there is a juxtaposition here of the prohibitions of Shabbos and the command to raise the funds or collect the materials for the Mishkan and to build the Mishkan. And Chazal say, we learn two things from that juxtaposition, both here and elsewhere, which is, number one, you might think that that the observance of Shabbos is preempted by the mitzvah of building the Mishkan. The answer is no, it's not. You must observe Shabbos, and you can only build the Mishkan during the 6 days of the week, but not on Shabbos. The other thing that we learn from the juxtaposition is the types of activity that are prohibited on Shabbos are precisely those types of activity, and there are 39 main categories and many, many subcategories. The specifics of the type of prohibited activities are those that were required to do for the Mishkan. So in other words, whatever was necessary, whether it was growing crops and the various stages involved in growing crops, or skinning animals, or building, or assembling, or dyeing, or any of those types of activities, those are all derived from the activities that were done in the Mishkan. Whatever that was done in the Mishkan, and the Gemara examines this very carefully, those are precisely the Lamed Tes Malachos, the 39 activities that are prohibited. So we see that there's a connection between Shabbos and the building of the Mishkan. And this might reflect, says the Malbim, on why it says, these are the things to do. Why did the Torah say to do rather than not to do? Because there's a combination of factors here. Supposed to build the Mishkan, just don't do it on Shabbos. So in other words, when the Torah says in the next verse, Sheshes yomim te'aseh melacha, 6 days work shall be done, there's an allusion here that derives from the juxtaposition that it's referring to the building of the Mishkan. Build the Mishkan during 6 days, the 6 days of the week. Don't do it on Shabbos. So these are the things that Hashem said to do, and this introductory phrase gives signals that we need to examine these verses and the subjects of these verses as a group. So that's why it's Eila Hadvarim, and that's why there is an introduction. Look at these things together, and that you should do them, meaning you should build a Mishkan, but not on Shabbos. How about this Vayakhel? Vayakhel is an unusual word. The root is Kufay Lamed, Kahal, an assembly. It's used several times, a couple of dozen times perhaps, in the Torah, but it's usually talking about when Bnei Israel of their own gathered, sometimes to complain, sometimes to demand, sometimes to speak to Moshe or Aaron. And on occasion, there is also an affirmative obligation like Hakel for a king to gather the people together. The connotation is that kahal implies something more than just an assembly. It implies a kind of organism comprised of individuals, almost like cells to a body. Each of the cells in this case, by analogy, is an individual, is a human being. And the body is the group. And there's a certain status, certain attributes, certain dynamism to the group that is not simply an assembly of individuals. So what might that be in this case? Well, Chazal explain that there is a group sense, a sense of the collective that is enhanced on Shabbos and perhaps created on Shabbos that we don't have during the rest of the week. And we're encouraged to take advantage of that sense of collective by attending shiurim, by attending classes on Shabbos about Shabbos. It doesn't have to be exclusively about Shabbos, but that's one of the things that the rabbis say is that people should gather in the study halls, in the Batei Midrashos, in the Batei Knesios, and they should learn the laws of Shabbos. Now, there's another contrast that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out in his book, Lessons in Leadership, where Rabbi Sachs contrasts the language of Hakel here with the use of the same word, or the same root word, Vayakhel ha'am al Aharon, that the people gathered together and they demanded, they saw that Moshe was delayed, according to their assessment, in coming down from the mountain, and they demanded action. They demanded an Egel Hazav, the golden calf. There, the gathering together was more of a mob than it was of an assembly. And that was a problem. And we see this language of kahal as a mob action frequently in the Torah. And in a mob, as we know, the mob takes on an identity of its own, and people do things in a mob that they wouldn't otherwise do. They lose inhibitions, and they act in concert in ways that they wouldn't act individually as a result of being in the mob. And Rabbi Sachs suggests that what Moshe is doing here is, now that there has been an achievement of kapara, of atonement for the Bnei Yisrael, which Moshe was successful in achieving in the previous Parsha in Kisisa, now he is using this power, this energy of the collective, and turning it around from a mob against Aharon to do something which was a deviation from God's will, and turning it into a collective assembly, a group, a community for the purpose of doing God's will. And he says, if you ever want to bring people together and build a team, get them to build. Get them to undertake a project together. And we see this a lot in our communities, where people gather to build organizations, to build synagogues, to build institutions, to build movements. When they work together, they create a sense of belonging and of being on the same team. And this, says Rabbi Sachs, is perhaps implied in the observation of Chazal. Talmidei Chachamim are Malbim Shalom Ba'olam, that scholars create peace in the world. Shenamar, as the verse says, V'chol banayach limudei Hashem, that all of your children shall be students of the Almighty. V'rav shalom banayach, and great in peace your banayach, which simply means your children. And the Chazal say, Al tikrei banayach ela bonoyach. Don't read it as your children, but rather as bonoyach. Bonoyach. Most often it's translated as your builders. I will add parenthetically that my Rabbi Rav Ahron Soloveichik used to say that we know that this verse refers to Talmid Chachamim, to scholars, because bonayach is milashon bin or bina, which means those who understand. Talmid Chachamim understand. Another way, and perhaps the most common way of rendering that verse, is Rav Shalom bonayach. Your builders are of great peace. And Rabbi Sachs suggests that Talmid Chachamim, that scholars of Torah, create teams that build. He says, if you want to build a team, create teams that build. And if you are a builder together with others, then you become a kahal. And our goal is to be a kahal, to be a community that serves God in the way that he wants and brings everybody else together with us. Have a good Shabbos.